Soothsayer of the program, Bill Gunter. Yesterday we started with you basically predicting that Brian Bowen would declare early for the NFL draft, or having talked about that.
2 days ago.
Right. Well, yesterday we talked about you having called it when we started the program. Today I have to applaud you for your analysis of your Miami Heat series with the Philadelphia 76ers, saying they had a pretty good chance as long as one guy didn't play. And when that one guy comes back, and Joel Embiid, good luck.
He played.
The ridiculous stat is inside the paint or inside of 5 feet, your Miami Heat, 1 out of 10 when Embiid was on the floor last night. 5 out of 10 when he wasn't.
Yeah, Embiid.
From 5 feet, professional basketball players. I saw one exchange midway through the fourth quarter because it was a 10-point game I had seen on Twitter. This is how I follow the NBA, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Like, let's get some conversation on Twitter. I saw the clip of Dwayne Wade being a 3-year-old and grabbing someone else's arm and slinging them into the crowd on the baseline. And so I'm like, it's it's a 5-point game, I think, when I turned it on in the fourth quarter. And this might be interesting. I like interesting games. And Embiid tries to he gets an entry pass, fakes it, spins, and then is kind of falling away from the basket, putting the shot up, and Justice Winslow comes and just stuffs him.
That's right, he did.
And then on the other end, Justice Winslow tries to score, and Embiid just swats it and tells him about it. And then Philadelphia goes to the other end of the floor, scores, ends up taking a 10-point lead, ends up with a 20-point win. Embiid scores the most points in his 76ers playoff debut since Allen Iverson in '99. He had 23, not extremely impressive necessarily, but a solid playoff debut. And your Heat now down 2-1.
It didn't go well in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
It was a close game, and then all of a sudden, the fourth quarter, Philly outscored Miami 32-14, and they kind of pulled away. And then there was some brouhahas at the end over last-second layups. And Dragic might have rubbed it in a little bit in Game 2 with a last-second layup, and then last night Philly tried to get him back, and Olynyk said, we're not going to have any of that mess down here in Miami. And I love
it when mediocre teams have some playoff intensity.
You know what? You say mediocre teams, and look, I don't think the Heat are going to win the championship. The Sixers, on the other hand, are pretty good.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
And I wouldn't rule it past. Now, Houston right now looks like the favorite. Golden State's kind of getting it going, and again, it looks like the champion will come out of the West. But the playoffs so far have been pretty entertaining. I don't know if we've gotten great games. Kind of like last night for 3 quarters. That was a fantastic game. I started watching the Braves. I was on the Braves and the Mets last night, and the Braves got out to a huge lead. I think they were up 6-0 in about the fourth, and I kind of went away from that and started watching the Heat and the Sixers. And all of a sudden, man, that was a great game. When it was high scoring, when we talk about playoff defense and how people don't watch the NBA during the regular season because they don't play any defense. Last night, you had 2 of the better defensive teams in the league, and they were absolutely going at each other offensively through the first 3 quarters, and it was a really, really entertaining game. And then in the fourth quarter, Philly just completely blows them away, pulls away and wins the fourth quarter by 18 points and wins the game by 20. But it was a really fun game to watch, very intense, and there's some bad blood brewing between those two teams, kind of a small rivalry, if you will. And it has led to, again, I wouldn't say a great game because the fourth quarter turned into a blowout and the final 5 minutes was kind of irrelevant. But the playoffs so far have kind of not let me down. I think they've been pretty stellar so far with what we've seen through the first about 4 games in each one of the NBA playoffs.
So were you trying to convince me that the Miami Heat's a good defensive team after they gave up 128 points last night?
Well, throughout the regular season, take it for what you will. They were 4th in defensive efficiency in the NBA.
So. Coming with stats this morning. How about that? Bill Gunter, ladies and gentlemen.
Take that for what you will. So I was kind of in the same boat last night with you when I threw something at the TV when the announcer read that stat out loud, and I thought, that's stats.
When you completely stole it. Got it. Now, I was complimenting you, I was like, he could have completely
from anywhere.
He could have completely made that up. I probably should check that first.
It was as they're reading it on the TV last night. I think I threw something at the TV going, that's not a true stat.
So Philadelphia up 2-1 in its series. New Orleans cruising over Portland. They win by 17 at home. They're up 3-0 in their series, as are the Warriors over the San Antonio Spurs with a 13-point win in San Antonio last night. So it looks like, the Warriors-Sixers one. I mean, the Heat-Sixers series so far has been the most entertaining. Entertaining comments last night from Dabo Swinney in response to a shot from Will Muschamp. We'll get to that as we roll on this morning. Also some comments from Mark Kingston ahead of the LSU series here in town at Founders Park this weekend.
Keeping his rotation the same as he did last week. Adam Hill moving back a day.
That was the news coming out of yesterday that Logan Chapman will remain in the weekend rotation and actually lead things off. A bit of a surprise for sure, because I don't think anyone would argue right now that Logan Chapman is your staff ace, and yet he gets the number one start for the second straight week. Did it last week. 4 solid innings against Arkansas. Before that, he threw really solid baseball against North Carolina in that neutral site game up in Charlotte. So looking to continue the trend is Carolina baseball, and then to have your two frontline pitchers on the back end of a series. Mark Kingston says that's the best way, the best approach that his team can take right now. Will be interesting to see what kind of response the Gamecocks have after losing that midweek game to Presbyterian 7-4 on Tuesday night with one of the best teams certainly in the SEC and then in the country. LSU started slow, and now they have been playing better baseball as of late. I believe they're second in the SEC West standings coming into this weekend.
Watched a little bit of that last night. Florida and Kentucky was on, I believe, the SEC network. They had 2 SEC games on last night. Florida, at least as I was watching, was kind of romping around over Kentucky last night down in Gainesville.
Yeah, 11-2 that final score. You mentioned the Braves. They're a 12-4 winner against the New York Mets. Jackie Bradley Jr., the Boston Red Sox, continue to cruise in the big leagues as well. They're an 8-2 winner on the West Coast against the LA Angels. Oh, tons of information to start off your Friday morning. We'll get into the ridiculous antics as we move on this morning, talking about some ridiculous stuff you may have seen in the stands. We may have seen. We'll get a Frank's Discount Tire poll question up and rolling this morning. We'll have a winner of our Take of the Week contest sponsored by the Gutterman here in South Carolina. A $25 Amazon gift card going out to you this morning as well. And we'll give you a chance to win $1,000 at the end of the program, like we have been doing here in the last few weeks or so.
There's areas where you thought you'd be maybe further ahead. There's areas where we've gotten some production out of guys, especially that we didn't expect. I'll use Parker Coyne as just one example. Is this is a kid that was fighting to make the team, and now he's been a pretty important part of our bullpen. Has an ERA in the ones, so there have been some very pleasant surprises. Our offense has been a little bit uneven. I think a lot of that has to do with who we face. Sometimes you just face really good pitching, especially in this league, that can shut you down.
Gamecocks go into tonight's series opener against LSU 20-17 overall in the season, 6-9 in the SEC. That's next to last in the conference standings on the eastern side of things. Tennessee, the only team below Carolina in the SEC East, Alabama and Mississippi State. A couple of teams, when you look at SEC standings overall, who rank below South Carolina right now. Auburn also 6-9 in SEC play. Missouri improved to 7-9 last night with a win against Vanderbilt in that series opener. They're playing that one at the SEC's other Columbia, 2-1. I think that final score. And the other score last night, not close, was 11-2. Florida winning big at Lexington to start that series. They improved to 13-3 in conference play and dropped Kentucky down to 7-9, just a game ahead of Carolina, or a half game ahead of Carolina in the standings, I should say. So that's where we stand as far as the SEC. LSU 9-6 in conference play, second in the SEC West, one game behind Arkansas.
I'm interested to see this pitching rotation. You're right, Logan Chapman has been throwing very well and was he didn't, I think, he threw 5 innings last week, but 4. Okay, 4, all right. Yeah, so he was good enough to get the win and put South Carolina in a position to get a win. So how does he perform tonight? And, South Carolina's always had a solid Friday night starter. You almost kind of wonder if this is the passing of the torch, potentially from Adam Hill onto Logan Chapman as the next guy who gets to be.
No.
Could be.
Let me stop you right
It might
there.
be. I really think this could be. I mean, you throw the way Chapman's been throwing. And certainly he's got all the makings of a great Friday night starter. And so certainly I think that this is probably the passing of the torch here from Adam Hill, just kind of handing the ball on to Logan Chapman to keep that great tradition going. And so
what happens on Saturday when Adam Hill goes? Does Logan Chapman hand him the ball back?
No, he's basically handing him the torch for the Saturday spot. And they've moved Cody Morris into the Sunday closer type role, and it's a very smart move, I think.
Sunday type closer rule.
Yeah, you're going in, you're to close out the series.
There's a reason when you look at the Gamecock pitching stats that you have two guys at the top of the list, and then you have a dotted line, and then everybody else. Those two guys are Morris and Hill, and they've thrown the bulk of the innings this year. They're 47 innings for Morris, 40 for Hill, and that includes a couple of missed starts because of injury. Chapman is the next guy. He's at 34 innings, but it hasn't been the same type of deal. He's thrown against now one big boy opponent on the weekend in Arkansas and another big boy opponent in North Carolina midweek. But this is more of an admission, I think, by Mark Kingston and company that the Gamecocks are where they are, and they need to structure their weekend pitching rotation like this because it's the best chance for them to win a series, point blank. I mean, and we saw they had the best case scenario in the Arkansas series, right, winning that first game last week with Logan Chapman. It made a lot of sense just from a logistics standpoint last week because they were playing a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series because Adam Hill has battled some injuries. They keep him on a Friday, and Logan Chapman threw well against North Carolina last time out. Throw him in there. I'd say it's been a crapshoot at best on a Sunday starter for most of the season for Carolina, so you're not losing anything by taking the typical Sunday starter out of the mix and changing things up. So that worked well last week because of what happened out of the bullpen mostly. It was a 3-1 lead, I think, when Logan Chapman left the game last week, and he was in line. I mean, he went 4 solid innings. 4 solid innings was also the shortest outing of the Arkansas ace Blaine Knight, his season. So let's not overstate 4 innings. It was good, and it was an impressive kind of gut check for a freshman. I think that's what Mark Kingston and Skylar Meade, they look at and say, all right, he can give us a good chance to start us off. And then when you have 2 quality pitchers on the back end of a series, that's what you need to compete in an SEC series. So what we saw out of the bullpen against Arkansas in the series opener last week was the most impressive part to me. When you get a guy who comes in out of the bullpen in Sawyer Bridges, who has been up and down, but went, I think, 2 2/3 last week, and then you had Eddie Demurius come in and get the final 7 outs. That was the recipe for them to start off a series as well as they possibly could. They're going to have to get that similar type outing, I think, out of the bullpen continuing now because Chapman hasn't been a guy who's going to take you necessarily 7 strong innings. That's a Friday night starter. Mm-hmm. The Gamecocks don't have that in Logan Chapman. They seemingly have had that in Adam Hill, but I think where he is, maybe with his health, I think he did go more than 100 pitches at Arkansas, but his control issues haven't allowed him to get it too deep into games. It's an interesting move, a bit of the roll of the dice, I think, because you're going to tax your bullpen a little bit with throwing Chapman out there. He's not a guy that's going to get you into the 8th inning, I don't think. I think we would all be shocked if he goes into the 7th, 8th inning against LSU tonight where he's held them to 1 or 2 runs. He's just not that kind of guy or hasn't been that kind of guy. Maybe he can be. I don't know. But that would be shocking. The Gamecocks don't have that kind of team seemingly this year. They have to piece things together to try to figure out ways to win series in the SEC.
Well, I think with Chapman, you want to see the development there that he can go further. And I think you'd like to see him get through 6. If he can turn it over to somebody in the 7th, a setup guy, whether it's Coyne or whether it's Bridges or whether it's Gilreath, and then you go to Demurius in the 8th and the 9th. But yeah, I think this is a good move, kind of sets you up. And look, I think there are people who are going to question it, but I think also it's a sign that Mark Kingston's looking for anything to light a fire under this team, not just for one game, but for a whole weekend series to try and pick up a big series weekend win.
Well, I think that's one of the things that you have to give a new staff high marks for. There is no, we're going to do this, and if it's not working, we're going to continue to do this and not make adjustments. And there have been adjustments all over the place in the offensive lineup, almost every single game out, there has been a tweak of some sort. And then in the pitching staff, now you see a different approach here going into the second half of the SEC season, the first series of the second half of the SEC season. Now, I say all of that without it also coming across as being we don't have any kind of approach at all, and we're just going to keep changing things for changing them's sake. That certainly is not what it seems like as well. So I think you have to give the first-year coaching staff high marks for their approach. Now they just need to get some better results moving forward, especially this weekend at home against LSU would be a huge momentum boost for a program that needs some positive momentum right now after losing to Presbyterian, just an awful midweek loss, a team that came in with a 275 RPI out of 297 teams in college baseball and dropping their record to below 500 against in-state opponents, adding Furman, Charleston Southern, the Citadel, all have now beaten South Carolina this year. And Mark Kingston said it as plainly as anyone could say it after that loss the other night. We should not lose these games, was his response.
Well, and here's the thing. I think you talk about consistency. It feels like every time South Carolina is down, they bounce back. They lose. They kind of blow that game against North Carolina. They're up, and then they give up 8 runs in the final 2 innings. And I'm sitting here saying, I think you were out that Thursday. I said, well, the wind's out of the sails for South Carolina. The wind is gone, and now they're in trouble. And sure enough, they get blown out of the water in Kentucky, 14-1. You go, okay, well, there you go. They've kind of cashed it in, packed it up, and called it a season. And they come back the next day and win 15-1. And it seems like when this team's kind of down, they've been able to respond a little bit. We'll see tonight coming off of that PC game, off that Presbyterian loss, if they're able to bounce back once again and go out and put themselves in position to pick up a series win. If you can win tonight, again, with Hill and Morris over the next 2 days, should be nice weather, so you shouldn't have to play 2 7-inning games on Saturday or Sunday. So you have that going for you. You should be able to maybe go out and get a series win that would, again, I don't know if it changes the dynamics or the direction of the season, but gives you something positive to build upon.
And makes you feel a lot better, especially with the brand name LSU.
You're right.
I mean, they played for the national championship last year. They are, if South Carolina is not the standard over the last 2-3 decades or so, LSU is right beside them. I think LSU was the standard, and then South Carolina kind of wrestled that from them. And when it comes to the SEC and success and national championships, I think you could probably argue that Florida now has taken that thing over after winning the national championship last year, off to a 13-3 start this year, and having played the Gamecocks for a national championship here in the last decade as well. That's where SEC baseball is. And the NFL draft almost here. That'll be round number 1 on Thursday, where Hayden Hurst expected to hear his name, or certainly hoping to hear his name in the first round. The Gamecock tight end getting a lot of buzz at this time, not only regionally here, but I think he's made more of a name for himself in other places where people maybe were not as familiar with his story and did not see any kind of specific highlight. Bill, I'm trying to think of maybe one highlight out there. That's how a lot of college football guys get known. On a Saturday, they'll make one outstanding play. That thing will get replayed Saturday night and Sunday morning, and you feel like by Sunday afternoon, the profile has increased nationally. I don't remember that significant play from Hurst. He had the long one at Texas A&M, but it didn't result in a touchdown there in his, sophomore year, I believe it was now. It was been a while ago. And then didn't catch a touchdown until the bowl game there in his sophomore season. And then last year, really good. Don't get me wrong. It had several plays that I think those of us around here would say, wow, the effort is so obvious, right? And he would keep going, and you could tell defensive backs did not enjoy trying to bring him down. But I don't remember a significant play that would have stood out nationally where people would say, well, have you seen that tight end at South Carolina? Am I missing one, or are you on the same page here?
In terms of, I don't think there's a national one. I think there was the play in the bowl game, I believe, in the third or fourth quarter. I think it was the fourth quarter where Bentley rolled to his right and kind of just chunked it up downfield on a 3rd and long, and Hayden Hurst went up and got it. There was the one-handed catch, I believe, against Connecticut in the Birmingham Bowl that he would end up taking in for a touchdown that I remember.
That would have been about 10 years ago if it was against Connecticut. South Florida you're talking about, right?
Well, he's been around for a long time, Tim.
He is an older guy, but he's not quite
I think he was making his debut in that game, and Garcia threw him a pass, if I remember correctly. But
in 2009.
Yeah, but no, you're right. I forgot against South Florida in the Birmingham Bowl. He made the one-handed catch last year. But with all that said, certainly it'll be fun to hear him. I love the NFL draft, man. You got all the information coming out right now. People are really
no. You don't have any information. You have misinformation coming out.
I mean, you got to love this time of the year. Kind of like Sean Payton saying the other day, there's not a good program-changing, organization-changing quarterback in the draft, and he's probably just saying that, so that he'll be able to get a quarterback in this draft to replace Drew Brees. What are the Patriots going to do? They've got to do something for the post-Tom Brady era. You got to go out and get another. It's a very exciting time as we count down till next Thursday. I'm very excited about this. Love all the news and information that comes out at this time about the NFL draft.
It's called hype. It's just like you love bracketology.
I mean, where is Saquon Barkley going to go here? A guy could completely change an organization. Browns have got 2 picks in the top 5. This could be the start of something special for the Browns. Here. This right here is where organizations are built. Draft day. On draft day, organizations are built. This is the best time of the NFL season.
Name the last really good draft pick for the Patriots.
Well, Tom Brady obviously stands out, but I mean, every year they land somebody. The way they go about doing it is just fascinating. It's phenomenal. They do a great job of it.
Please go into last year's draft and tell me their draft picks.
Oh, last year, I mean, they had a big draft last year. It was great, but I'll tell you exactly what it was in a second.
Just to give you a bit of perspective about Hayden Hurst and his profile right now, it looks like he's the 3rd headline on ESPN.com's NFL Draft News, talking about the yips ruining his career. So that story has been told many, many times, especially for those of us around here, how he was a minor league pitcher drafted out of high school, and it did not work out well, and he gets a second chance in football. And I think really identified with the football mindset. It was interesting when he came in studio here a little bit before his pro day several weeks ago, talking about that whole mindset that he had, knowing Perry Orth. They were buddies in high school, but he didn't even play his senior year of high school football because his baseball career was so promising. And he felt like he was kind of destined to be a first-round guy. Then his agent prices him out. I think he ended up going in the 10th round, goes to the Pittsburgh Pirates organization, and felt like it was a bad start to begin with because of the draft situation, and then never really got things going. And somehow he had that situation where he just completely loses control, and it was really debilitating, I think, for him. He loves to tell the story now because he feels like it can offer a lot of people some hope, and maybe they can identify with some struggles they've had in their lives, and they can be inspired to overcome like he has. And I think playing angry is probably the most used phrase when talking about Hayden Hurst and his ability to be not only a pass catcher in the NFL, but also to be a solid blocker. You're going through the New England Patriots draft history. You seem to be blown away by all the really good players they picked.
Well, I mean, what they did last year was very smart. They drafted Derek Rivers, who they were going after defensive ends because they needed, and Rivers was injured. So it was kind of like a redshirt year for him this past year, which is very smart, putting him in the organization, letting him marinate for a year, really developing his skill, learning from a bunch of pros, learning the organizational standard and how you come in and you work hard every day. Very smart.
So you're saying a smart team drafts a guy who gets hurt the next year and doesn't play at all as a rookie.
I mean, that's how
you build a Super Bowl franchise.
Yeah, I mean, he learned the organization last year. He learned the Patriot way, not having to focus on the day in, day out aspects of prepping for a game. He was able to learn how the organization prides itself on hard work, on coming in each and every day, showing up. He was able to learn the Tom Brady method for prepping your body. Is very smart on their part.
People that don't identify sarcasm at this point have to be just really shaking their head. And it is rare form this morning for Bill. This is what happens when we give him 2 days off at the beginning of the week. I think by the time we get to Friday, you get this special mix. So the NFL releasing its schedule last night. What I pay attention to is more the bigger picture. So I like that I feel like years now of just dog Thursday night games, it seems like they finally figured it out. They have a new partner now on Thursday night in Fox, and I'm sure Fox rallied for this or maybe paid for this handsomely, but they're finally giving us some good games on a Thursday night. For instance, Vikings-Rams in Week 4. That's a legit kind of game of the week almost thing that we just haven't seen on Thursday night for the most part. You got a Packers-Seahawks game at one point, an Eagles-Giants game. Mm-hmm. This is something that's going to make me tune in on a Thursday night. Also, what will help me now that I'm an old man and have that old man mentality of, hey, why are these games so late at night? They're moving things up a little bit. Now, not a ton, but on Monday night, when I was a kid growing up, Monday Night Football was something I rarely got to see because it started at 9 o'clock.
Right.
They moved it back to 8:30, and now they've moved it back from 8:30 to this year. Kickoff on Monday nights are going to be 8:15. Fantastic, in my opinion. I always thought that Sunday night they did a pretty good job sticking it at 8:30. Well, they've moved that back now to 8:20 on Thursday night and 8:25 on a Sunday night. So they've moved things back a few minutes to help any kind of complaining about staying up too late. I think it's a smart move in the NFL big picture kind of thing, realizing that they have taken a hit as far as being on the pinnacle of the sports mountain. They're still there. There's no doubt about it. They're the king. But the numbers have gone down a little bit recently. I think they're making some minor adjustments here to help themselves out in the long run.
Yeah, 15 minutes. I mean, you're right. Going from 8:30 to 8:15, I'm sure that'll help a lot of older people now that they'll be able to grasp that extra 15 minutes there early on. But I was glancing very quickly at the Panthers schedule. Pretty entertaining. Open the season with Dallas in Carolina or at Bank of America. Then they go to Atlanta. You got Cincinnati and New York, and actually Cincinnati bye week, then New York, weeks 3, 4, and 5. A trip to Washington, a trip to Philadelphia, then homestand against Baltimore and Tampa Bay. Road trips on a Thursday night. There's a Thursday night game for you. Pittsburgh and Carolina, the game in Pittsburgh. Then a trip to Detroit. You got Thanksgiving weekend. Seattle coming to Carolina. That's kind of an entertaining game. Then a trip to Tampa Bay. They get that aforementioned Cleveland Brown team. I expect to be much better with these draft picks. New Orleans, Atlanta, and then wrapping up the regular season at New Orleans. So you play New Orleans on a Monday night, December 17th. You play Atlanta, and then you go on the road to New Orleans. So your final three is against your biggest divisional rivals, but 2 of the final 3 against New Orleans.
Kind of don't like that. Weird. It makes zero sense when you have a 16-game schedule to shove in 2 against the same team in the last 3 games. That's the problem I have with that schedule. Also, the December trip to Cleveland, I think, being pointed out there is going to be an interesting matchup. And
of course it will.
Maybe one that the Browns could steal in some bad weather against the Panthers.
I see you're already on board. Browns maybe stealing some games this year with these draft picks and having Myles Garrett from last year. Could be a turnaround year for Hugh Jackson and the Browns there with the way that they're lining up that organization. Yeah. Everybody's taking them lightly.
So you're all in on the Browns this year.
Well, I mean, they can't go any worse than 0-16.
If I asked you who is the most influential person in the NFL, what do you say?
The most influential person in the NFL, I would have, in order, Roger Goodell.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably go Jerry Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Third, I'd probably have Tom Brady.
Okay. I got no problem with that list, except this year it happens to be this guy.
I gave all my oxygen.
You know who this guy is?
Ed Sheeran, man. This is good music.
Well, that was way too That was way too soon.
It's good. Ed Sheeran's all over this.
What does Ed Sheeran have to do with the NFL? You may be asking yourself. His concert schedule changed or forced 8 NFL teams or 8 NFL games to not be played on Sunday in a specific venue. Detroit, New England, New York, Tennessee, Kansas City, Minnesota, Dallas, and Atlanta. All these huge stadiums all have Saturday night Ed Sheeran concerts during the football season, so they couldn't play Sunday home games because of Ed Sheeran.
The guy's a rock star.
Your girl, Taylor Swift, 3 of those dates this upcoming NFL season. And
also a rock star.
Beyonce and Jay-Z with 2 of them. So, if you want to really tick people off this morning as you're heading to work or school, when you're talking about influence in the NFL, just tell them Ed Sheeran is number 1 in 2018.
Okay.
I'm stunned by that. Like, if it's their home field, like, they don't get first dibs? Ka-ching, ka-ching.
I mean, come on.
Are
you really, Ed Sheeran, You gonna take an NFL game, a Sunday over a Saturday night Ed Sheeran concert?
What I'm stunned by is that Ed Sheeran is playing Ford Field in Detroit, Gillette Stadium in New England. He didn't strike me as a stadium guy.
No.
Apparently.
All right, I'll put that on the
what
poll.
he can do.
I'm going to start a poll. Is Ed Sheeran a stadium act? There's no doubt. In my mind, this is going to be overwhelmingly yes.
Okay, we'll just play Ed Sheeran all morning.
Or not.
Biggest free agent in college football history. That's what Jalen Hurts' father says about his son if he were to decide to transfer and lose out on the starting quarterback job for Alabama. The spring football, it's going back and forth, and the battle is playing out between Hurts and the guy who took his job in the middle of the national championship game and won it for Alabama and Tua Tagovailoa. I asked you, Bill, as we ended hour number one, if that is not the case. I am agreeing with where Jalen Hurts' dad has come from. I completely agree. Biggest free agent in the history of college football. If he is not, then who has that title right now?
Well, I think with Hurts, it's interesting because of his resume, not necessarily because of...
I'm sorry, his what?
Resume. I was highlighting resume.
How have you ever gotten a job if that's how you presented it? Oh, thank you for inviting me for this interview. I'd like to show you my resume.
It's the way, you know.
I'm just having a hard time putting.
Come on, man!
into
It's
words.
Friday. Loosen up, lighten up a little bit. Let's get some more Ed Sheeran music going. Resume. The fancy way to say it.
I gotta shoot that off there. By the way, Craig sending us maybe the most angry response we've ever gotten on the Shepherd's Glass inbox. I wouldn't get out of the electric chair to go see Ed Sheeran or Taylor Swift. I am going to see Beck next weekend. That's real music.
Give me a break.
So you might be wondering, if you're just joining the program, why the heck we would be talking about any kind of musical acts like Ed Sheeran or Taylor Swift or Beck. Well, Ed Sheeran, the NFL making us very aware of last night after it released its schedule, his concert schedule directly affected 8 NFL games, requiring them not to play at home on a Sunday after a Saturday night Ed Sheeran stadium concert, which has led us to ask the Frank Cisco Tire poll question, is Ed Sheeran a stadium concert act? And the overwhelming majority of you agreeing with me with an emphatic no there. Bill is crushed.
A lot of, yeah. We don't have a music-savvy crowd listening here.
What?
Michael Beckham weighs in this morning and says, had to look it up to see who that was.
Oh, well done, Michael.
I mean, give me a break.
I don't believe it, but well done, sir.
Exactly.
Unbelievable. But number one, Ed Sheeran, fantastic. One of the best performers out there right now. Hands down.
Like you
No
are
doubt.
some kind of evaluator of all the performers
just
out
absolutely
Can I
fantastic.
see your music list right now on
there.
your phone?
It leads with this. The LMFA. He thinks LMFAO.
It's LMFAO,
Really talented performers.
Oh man,
Red
absolutely.
Foo, and yeah. So anyway,
I'm sorry, what?
it's one half of them.
Red Foo?
Yeah, that's his name.
I just feel old and grizzled this morning.
Oh yeah.
You guys don't appreciate quality music. Did you guys go to the Eagles on Monday night?
Did not, no.
I would have gone. I would have gone to that.
Had you known 2 of their songs?
I know a couple of them. There's the one about standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And the one about the
take it easy.
hotel?
Yeah,
In a
the
state
one about a
or something?
hotel. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
That's about all you got?
Hotel California's really good. I mean, everybody's very excited about it. It was a great concert from what I understand. So, Ed Sheeran, I mean, the Eagles are, I can see where the Eagles not stadium concert material. Ed Sheeran definitely is. No doubt about that. I understand. We'll
hit
make
him
up.
at Will Gunter. With
We'll make up for that. All right, let's go back to the free agent thing that moved us off. So if you were the freshman, not the overall player of the year, but the freshman player of the year in your conference.
Right, like Jalen Hurts was in the SEC.
If you threw for 2,300 yards, but you were at a lesser school, you decided to transfer, you'd be a pretty big deal, right?
Well, 2,300 yards is not necessarily a ton of yards.
Didn't
for
play
a
all the
starting
games.
quarterback.
Didn't play all the games.
Okay.
Baker Mayfield. We don't remember it quite as much because he was a walk-on, but Baker Mayfield and what he did for Texas Tech was a pretty big deal when he was transferring out.
Mm-hmm.
Baker Mayfield, as a freshman at Texas Tech, threw for 2,300 yards, was 218 for 340, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He was
sorry,
named
what was that line again? 12
touchdowns, 9
9
interceptions.
picks?
9 interceptions. he earned Big 12 Conference Freshman Offensive Player of the Year.
Oh, Freshman of the Year. Jalen Hurts earned Player of the Year.
But his statistically...
Freshman of the Year. I mean, a lot of times those awards are given out almost by default because there are very few entries into that award a lot of times.
I mean, as a freshman, Hurts was really good. 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He has 62% completion percentage. Hurts started all the games and threw for 20.
Look, you don't
28.
have to,
I'll round
those
up. I'll
numbers
round
are
up.
all irrelevant.
Yards.
All you need to know about Jalen Hurts is 26-2, man, as a starter.
But
he earned the job. He earned the job as a freshman, earned it, and led his team to what would have been the college football national championship had
if
Deshaun Watson and company not been on the other side making that ridiculous drive.
If Blake Sims would have transferred out, remember Blake Sims? He would have been considered.
No.
See, I think
No.
here's where I disagree. Here's why I disagree with you. I think the Alabama quarterback position is a system position. Just plug somebody in. Look at what they've done.
There's no doubt about that argument.
All right, and
that
so
is clear
to
through
me,
the years.
I'm not. It's not that I'm discrediting Jalen Hurts and saying that if he went to any program, he'd be a bum and he'd be awful. But I also think that Jalen Hurts' numbers are a byproduct of playing for Alabama and what he does.
There's no doubt there's a percentage of it.
Look, this isn't some random gas baggy hot take because I was telling you this after their first playoff game that I didn't like the offense. This is not just some middle of April thing that I'm coming up with.
Well, even when Lane Kiffin comes out and basically in the middle of the national championship game last year says put Tua Tagovailoa in, and if anybody would have a solid insight into that, that's our boy Lane.
What an exciting time!
It is an exciting time with the draft coming up. But I think that Jalen Hurts is more of a product of I don't know how much success Alabama's had because of Jalen Hurts. Mm-hmm. Now, had they left Blake Barnett's the guy that he beat out, who has since transferred to Arizona State. I don't know how much success Alabama has necessarily had because of Jalen Hurts, or if you'd have plugged in Blake Barnett. Cooper Bateman was the other quarterback that had played for them a little bit that started at the Ole Miss game, and they kind of went around 2 years ago. And I don't know if it's necessarily – I don't think that Jalen Hurts, the talent – is equal to that record. I think a lot more of it is because he's had some really, really good players around him.
Defense has been pretty good, too.
That would be players around him.
But a quarterback is judged more than just his numbers and his stats and his passing yards. That's why I said there's no even real reason to get into all the yards. But still, those yards, the touchdown to interception ratio, really impressive. What Jalen Hurts has done, his resume through 2 years in college football is close to unequaled. His first 2 years. So
bigger free agent. Close. I'll tell you this, bigger free agent. I'll tell you a bigger free agent. I wouldn't. Okay. Russell Wilson might have been.
Okay, I'll give you that. He's in the conversation now. Matt wants to hit us up with Cam Newton. Okay, it worked out really well for Cam Newton. I get that, but you put up Cam Newton's resume early on in college, getting the only thing I know that he did at Florida was get busted for stealing a computer and get in trouble. He didn't do anything. I mean, he had Tim Tebow playing in front of him. I get it. And he was really highly sought after, especially after he wins a junior college national championship at Blinn Junior College. I get that. But you compare the resume, man. It's not even – we didn't know Cam Newton was Cam Newton after his Florida days.
And here's the other guy, and I remember it because it was really as recruiting was starting to, in the early 2000s, starting to really develop and grow, and he was the top-rated quarterback coming out, and he didn't play, and then he decided to transfer. But Brock Berlin transferring from Florida was a big time. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
you're going to give me Mitch Mustaine.
Also big, yeah, that's a good one too. But Brock Berlin leaving Florida, especially after he had played the bowl game and against, I think it was Maryland, that Grossman had been suspended. I think that was Spurrier's final game at Florida. But Berlin going down to Miami, but that was a big deal as well. But not so much because of, as you said, the resume. It was more of because of the perception of Brock Berlin, the recruit who had to wait his time behind Grossman.
So I think a lot of this is revisionist history, right? Because we think of Cam Newton now as the Heisman Trophy winner, a national championship guy, and a guy who was the number one NFL draft pick and has gone on to lead the Panthers to the Super Bowl. But he wasn't that coming out of Florida when he transferred. Baker Mayfield, we think of him now as the guy who's done all this stuff at Oklahoma. He wasn't that coming out of Texas Tech. He was a walk-on who had a pretty good, how many games did you say? 8 games, maybe 6 games?
Started Mayfield?
6?
I'll go back and look.
He put up, threw 12 touchdowns and 9 picks in his freshman season. A talented kid, but nowhere near the numbers and the resume of what Jalen Hurts has done. Some other guys another guy who came to my mind was we see it sometimes when a coaching change shifts a system. A guy like Ryan Mallett was sitting at Michigan, all the tools from an NFL standpoint that you could ask for, but when Rich Rodriguez comes in and changes the system, he's basically irrelevant. So he goes down to Arkansas, has a really good college career, and goes on to the NFL. But his stats at the time after a freshman year of throwing 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, you kidding me? His passing percentage was 43, his completion percentage. So not even in the same stratosphere as what Jalen Hurts has done. If you want to tell me Nick Marshall was a really good transfer to Auburn, I agree with you. Got him to a national championship game, but what he had done at Georgia was nothing as a defensive back.
But I'm with you on what you're saying. I think my thing when Jalen Hurts' father comes out and says biggest free agent ever, possibly. But I also, again, to me, Jalen Hurts is more of a product of the Alabama system, and as you said, having really good players around him than he is a guy who has elevated Alabama to another. And Alabama, I get it. It's tough to elevate them to another program. But
another level. Mm-hmm.
But look, you plug guys into that system. How many quarterbacks from Alabama have gone on to be great pro quarterbacks during the Saban era? McElroy's doing TV. A.J. McCarron's going to be the best one you got.
He's the only one in the NFL.
And,
basically.
And so with all that being said, when he says biggest free agent, I'm not saying teams wouldn't take him. I'm not saying that Dan Mullen wouldn't take him at Florida. I'm not saying that Mark Richt wouldn't take him at Miami. I'm not saying that Tom Herman wouldn't take him at Texas. I think teams would take him because he is a talent. But there's also a reason people are kind of suggesting already that he should maybe switch positions, that he's not a long-term, that he's not an elite-level quarterback. And I know that's crazy to say because of the statistics, but again, how much of those statistics are based around having great players around you?
Well, if you're going to go that way, you could argue that Will Grier was a really huge transfer from Florida, having been the only quarterback here in the last, since Tim Tebow to have success down at Florida.
If Will Grier doesn't leave for whatever, how was it? I forget what it was labeled. I don't want to say PED. Okay,
yeah.
All right, so okay, it was. So then you're right. Then I think that Grier could be in that discussion, but obviously the circumstances surrounding his transfer are a little bit different.
Shea Patterson, you could put him up there. He's a guy who's put up ridiculous numbers early on in his career, leaving Ole Miss because of a bowl ban, basically. He says he feels like he got tricked by the coaching staff and is trying to get eligible immediately at Michigan. It doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Let's for a second, hypothetically, if you're just tuning in, let's say Hunter Johnson, the former number 1 pro-style quarterback, decides to transfer from Clemson in this offseason. Looks around, sees Kelly Bryant, sees Trevor Lawrence, looks around, says, you know what, it's not going to work here. There's only one person who can take snaps. It's not like the wide receiver position. I wonder how many coaches would look and say, I'd rather have Hunter Johnson than Jalen Hurts. Because I think Hunter Johnson, here's where it's interesting. Jalen Hurts, you have a resume to go on. You have
proven
production.
But also some deficiencies.
But you have Hunter Johnson, who might actually be the better quarterback.
Mm-hmm. But that is such a gamble. It sounds like basically what the NFL draft is right now. The draft that it will largely ignore a huge body of proven production in college football and then just project a Wyoming quarterback to be the best guy out of a bunch of proven guys.
Or, and we could take it a step further, 2 true freshmen. One of them already has transferred in Jacob Eason. Because you're right, you mentioned Jacob Eason earlier, going back home to Washington. But how many coaches across the country, because you can find fault with Jacob Eason coming in and having to adjust to a brand-new coaching staff and not something that was already set in place. A brand-new coaching staff, a team that was not as talented at that particular time as Alabama, and having to adjust his freshman year. How many coaches would have, if you were to put Jacob Eason and Jalen Hurts on the market at the same time, and you line coaches up and said, okay, you get to choose which one you want, I wonder how many would take Eason over Hurts.